Okay, in example 4, it says given that u over 2 is equal to 165 degrees, find each of the following. Alright, so they gave us the angle is 165 degrees. Do we know anything about 165 degrees? We don't. It's not one of them that we labeled on our unit circle, so we don't know an ordered pair. So short of putting this in our calculator and get a rounded answer, we can't find an exact. So what if we need to find an exact? Well, that's why they said this is a half angle, which means it's 165 degrees will be equal to our u over 2. Because look what happens when we solve for u. If I multiply both sides by 2 to get u by itself, I find u is equal to 165 times 2 is 330 degrees, which is an angle that we have labeled on our unit circle, which has an ordered pair of the square root of 3 over 2, negative 1/2. So we can solve for sine of u over 2 or sine of 165 degrees using the half angle formula. Alright, so to remind us of our half angle formula, we know that it's equal to plus or minus the square root, and this is the big square root, okay, because it's got a fraction in it. And it's going to be 1 minus cosine of u all over 2. Now, our problem here is 165 degrees equals. So sine of 165 degrees equals. 165 degrees is in quadrant 2. And is sine positive or negative in quadrant 2? Well, remember, all students take calculus, right? So sine is positive. So we know it's going to be a positive square root of 1 minus cosine. We already found u. We said it was 330 degrees all over 2. So that's the problem that we're going to work on. So I don't have to keep putting the positive sign in front, okay? Because as long as there's no negative, we know that means it's positive. So then we have the square root of 1 minus cosine of 330 degrees. Well, we can find that looking at our ordered pair. Remember, cosine is our x value. So we know that it's going to be the square root of 3 over 2. And then this is all over 2 here. And let's see, we don't like fractions within fractions. So we can multiply every term by that denominator there to get rid of it. And so when I do that, let's see, we got the square root of 2 minus, those are going to cancel, so I have the square root of 3 all over 4. But be careful, remember a fraction under a radical is the same as saying taking the square root then of the top over the square root of the bottom. Now I know the numerator looks funny there, square root then a square root, but it's allowed, okay? So you got the square root of 2 minus the square root of 3 in the numerator all over the square root of 4 is going to be 2. And so there is our solution for part A, for sine of 165 degrees. Alright, let's look at B. Cosine of u over 2. Well, I'm going to write out my formula again. And so we have that cosine of u over 2 is equal to plus or minus a big square root. And it's 1 plus cosine of u all over 2. It's almost the same thing as sine, but it's a plus sign inside instead of a minus sign inside. Alright, so for cosine of 165 degrees, is it going to be positive or negative? Well, we said 165 degrees is in quadrant 2, and what do we know about cosine in quadrant 2? It's negative. So we're going to put a negative square root of 1 plus cosine of u. We had cosine, we said u was 330 degrees, and it's all over 2. So we got negative square root 1 plus, we know cosine of u is the square root of 3 over 2, all over 2. This should look familiar, right? It's almost the same thing as what we were doing before, except for now it's a negative out in front and a plus sign inside. Again, I'm going to get rid of the little fraction inside. So I'll multiply everything by its denominator, every term. And so when I do that, I've got the negative square root of 2 plus, that's going to cancel, so square root of 3 all over 4. Again, I'm going to separate the numerator and the denominator here. And because I can take the square root of 4, I'm going to do that. So we got the negative square root of 2 plus the square root of 3 all over the square root of 4 is 2. And so that is what cosine of 165 degrees is equal to. All right, and then last one, we got tangent of u over 2. Well, we got several formulas. I shouldn't say lots, but we got several formulas there to choose from. And it doesn't really matter which one we're going to do. But we've already been working with the 1 minus cosine of u or 1 plus cosine of u in the numerator. So I'm just going to pick one of them. I really don't want to use the first one if you're looking at your formulas right now with the plus or minus. Just because you see you got 1 minus cosine of u and 1 plus cosine of u, I think it might take me a little bit more work. But I still could use it, okay? I just have to pick a personal preference. It doesn't matter which one. So let's go with, I'm going to choose a second one. So it is, what is that, 1 minus cosine of u over sine of u. Alright, so we're looking for tangent of 165 degrees, which means it's equal to 1 minus cosine of 330 degrees over sine of 330 degrees. So we got 1 minus cosine of 330 degrees. We said cosine was our x, so it's going to be square root of 3 over 2 over sine of 330 degrees. Sine is our y, so it's going to be negative 1/2. All right, so let's see. Don't like these fractions, so I'm going to multiply by that denominator. Now, I'm going to be careful, though, because notice the only other thing I have in the denominator here is a negative 1. So what if I multiply by a negative 2? That way to make that negative cancel out as well. So when I do this, I get what? Negative 2 plus square root of 3 all over 1, which is just negative 2 plus the square root of 3. And that is tangent of 165 degrees.